Hello, Sheila. Hello, Michael. We have a special edition today, as I indicated in the email. We have a special edition where we get slightly longer. We're going to go for 30 minutes. And we're going to talk about Tu B'Shvat. And we have a few other people who have logged in. Okay. And admit all. Okay. And we have Mr. Givanther, Robert Givanther, and Robert Voigt. And here comes the one and only.
Yeah.
Shalom Aleichem, Mrs. Rosen. Good to see you. Happy Tu B'Shvat. So in the email I post, everyone should remember to eat a new fruit and the fruits that Eretz Yisrael are praised with, and so on. And that's all good. So I'm gonna put something up here. Okay. And we're going a little bit, as I indicated in the email, we're going to have a 30-minute discussion today. If you have to leave early, you do. But we're doing something a little bit, okay.
I need some tissues. I don't know where I'm at.
Okay, so, a minute. Okay, so there's a few of the Gemaras I want to use here, so we're going to show this later. Now we're just going to start with the basic information. So, hello everyone, and so the 15th of Shvat there's a very short Mishnah that says it's Rosh Hashanah Lilanot, the Rosh Hashanah for trees. Now, I'm going tonight in the Big Idea class, we're going to talk about the debate of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai and so on, but for our shorter purposes today, basically it's like a fiscal year. We talked about it this morning, right? So since there are different tithes that I have to give in the land of Israel each year, so when does one year begin and the other year end? So when it comes to the fruits of the tree, since the earliest tree to blossom in Israel that was indigenous to Israel at the time is the almond tree, and that blossoms on around, depending on the Jewish year and solar year, but around the 15th of Shvat. So that is when we begin counting the new year for trees. So if you have a tree that blossomed before the 15th of Shvat of this year, it belongs to last year for tithes and the various gifts we give from the trees, and like the first fruits. And if your tree blossomed at any point after Tu B'Shvat, it belongs to this year, to fiscal year, to tithing year 5781. So it's the new year for trees. So then the idea is, so the Gemara says that on the 15th of Shvat, Hashem judges the trees, which doesn't mean good tree, bad tree. It means that Hashem judges which fruit trees will flourish and which will be struck by blight, which will give a really good crop, and so on. God governs everything in the universe, and the particular experience, as if it were, of the trees is going to be the particular decision is made on the 15th of Shvat. Now, I want to say that the question of all the comparisons between important ideas in Judaism and fruits and trees and so on, we're going to leave is tonight's topic. So here we're going to focus upon a few key ideas related specifically to Tu B'Shvat. In other words, to the celebration of the fruits of the tree. Because as you know, when the sages decreed brachot, they made one set of blessings for the fruits of the tree and another set of blessing for the fruits of the ground. Now, let us say you made a mistake. So you made Borei Pri Adama, blessed is he who creates the fruit of the ground. On an apple, you still fulfill your obligation. Why? Because every fruit of the tree is also a fruit of the ground. So why are the fruits of the tree set aside? And so we talked about it a little bit this morning, and I want to expand upon it. And that has to do with the idea that the fruits of the tree exist for tainug, for pleasure. In other words, all the basic nutrients that we need, we can get from the fruits of the ground. All the vitamins and so on can be found in things that grow from the ground. What is the primary function of the fruits of the tree? So the fruits of the tree, generally speaking, most of them, with the exception of lemons and the like, are sweet, and they're sweet and they give pleasure. Even lemons and limes and etrogim and so on, they give flavor to things, they give pleasure to things. They're not strictly necessary for life. Again, even vitamin C, which is prevalent in certain fruits, is also prevalent in certain things that grow in the ground. So you don't absolutely need anything more than grains and root vegetables and leaves in order to survive. So in the context of Hashem's creation of the universe, that everything has a person that is reflective and reflexive on the human experience, the primary function of the fruit of the tree is to give us pleasure. So, and this is indeed when the trees begin to blossom, and we go out and say a blessing in the month of Nisan. So we say, blessed is he who created all kinds of wonderful things. I will read you the specific bracha, which we say at some point after Passover. It's in the brachot right here. Looking at the art scroll, it should be right after. Here we are. Okay. Yeah, here. So when you go out in the period, from the spring equinox on, in the period of Nisan. So what is it here? There we are. Okay. Here. Blessed Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed you, King of the universe, who did not shelo chisar b'olamo davar. He did not leave anything missing in this world, and he created beautiful creatures and beautiful trees for people to have pleasure with. In other words, the purpose of a tree, of the fruits of the tree, and the reason why they exist from a cosmic point of view is to bring us pleasure. So there are multiple layers to this. The first layer is that God simply wanted our lives to be bright and beautiful, and gave us the ability not merely to sustain ourselves, but to enjoy. And that enjoyment, if we thank Hashem for it, and especially if we enjoy it in the context of a Sudat mitzvah, a meal that's a mitzvah, such as all the meals of Shabbat and so on, so it's also uplifted. And the idea is that God didn't create a gray and drab world, but a world in which we can experience pleasure. And as the Gemara says, that Rav used to say, till I have a good piece of meat and some good wine, I don't learn as good. And Maimonides writes that beautiful artwork and trees and gardens and an airy, spacious room, they open up a person's mind. In other words, when a person is comfortable and their senses are expanded by experiencing permissible pleasure, they can use that expansion of the sense and sense of relaxation and happiness and gratitude to Hashem to better do mitzvot, to better study Torah, to better pray, and so on. So that's the first level. On a deeper level, everything physical has a spiritual source, and therefore the pleasure that we derive from the fruit that we eat, the pleasure that we derive from all the beautiful and tasty and fragrant things that God created, is a reminder that just as our body exists this way, our soul needs to exist this way. And it's a reminder that spiritually we shouldn't satisfy ourselves with astronaut food. In other words, when the first astronauts went up, now it's a little bit better, they had this food in toothpaste tubes, and it didn't have much taste, but it had all the vitamins and fat and protein and carbs that they needed. It wasn't particularly good, but so Hashem didn't. So just like physically, God didn't just give us grain and potatoes and lettuce to live on, but Hashem created all these beautiful, pleasurable things. So too in our Judaism, it's not sufficient merely to do a mitzvah automatically like an automaton. It's not sufficient just to say the words of the prayer with some understanding of what they mean. It's not sufficient just to study the Torah on its basic level, but there needs to be this concept of pleasure. In other words, that we should be able to pray with great concentration and great focus and appreciate the depths and the multiple layers and everything, that we not merely learn the Torah, we penetrate to its depths. We find its sweetness and the inner meaning and inner secrets of the Torah that become accessible to us. That we do a mitzvah, that we enter a mitzvah with a full kavanah, with a full focus and understanding of what the concept of this mitzvah is and what it means, in the simple meaning, in the allegorical, in the homiletical, and even in the mystical. And when we do a mitzvah, we do it as beautifully as possible. We enjoy it. We don't see it as a burden. We buy the nicest tefillin, and and light Shabbat candles and the nicest candelabra we can afford, and so on. And again, on the deepest level, that we understand the meaning of what we do, and we understand its inner meaning till it permeates every aspect of our mind and our emotion and so on. That is the fruits, that is the pleasure of Judaism. So just like Hashem created a world in which our bodies don't merely sustain themselves, but can enjoy great and permitted pleasure, so too with our experience of Torah and prayer and mitzvot. We should constantly be finding ways to make them deeper and more evocative, and most of all, more enjoyable, because we acquire the joy in godliness. And to do that, to some extent, we have to turn our focus and our ambition and our sense of pleasure away from the physical. But the idea of that Hashem created the fruits of the tree is a reminder that our approach to Judaism shouldn't be in what is my obligation, but what more can I do? It's not something which is a burden that I have to carry, but an incredible opportunity, an incredible garden of delights, a beautiful orchard that I want to wander in, and I want to wander further and further and deeper into it. That is the second idea that emerges from Tu B'Shvat. The second is, so you know that that many things in life are better understood in slow motion. In other words, you want to understand exactly how to do some activity or what's taking place when you hit when some mechanical device fails. If you can use time-lapse photography, so you can slow it down or see it, moment by moment, you understand it much better, right? Much of America is focused now on the football playoffs. So, you want to understand, it happened so fast. You want to understand exactly what happened and the intricacies of the play. You have to watch it in slow motion. And this is another gift that the concept of focusing on trees give us. Trees live in slow motion. Trees live much longer than us, and their lifespan is in a much slower way. So what takes an instant for a person, in other words, to move a little bit, for a tree, trees move, but it takes a long time for them to move from one place to another. Now, there are many aspects of trees we're going to talk about that is tonight's shir, but what I want to talk about here, today's Tu B'Shvat class, is devoted to the immediate lessons of Tu B'Shvat. So one of the immediate lessons from the slow motion nature of a tree is as follows. So when I was a little kid, growing up in Portland, Maine, we lived on a street that was a relatively new street. And it didn't have any trees, much of, or I believe it had elms which died from this elm disease. At any rate, when I was a little boy, there were no trees. And the department of, I remember it was very interesting. When I was like 3-4 years old, the Department of Public Works came and they planted trees. They planted these little tiny trees with wood stakes and metal and metal wires around them, like they do, so they should grow straight and so on. But of course, one tree leaned a bit to the right, one to the left, because that's what trees do. So many years later, I came back for a Shabbaton, and I went to see my old house, which is right next to the old shul. And it was, since that happened, about 50 years. And in 50 years, they grew to substantial trees. They're still, adolescents by tree standards. And you know what? The tree that leaned a little bit to the left, now it leans a lot to the left. The tree that leans a little bit to the right, now they're big, huge trees, but they lean. You see the characteristics. So what do we see from there? That a very, very small deformity in a tree, or a small lean or distortion in a tree, when it's very young, over time, you see that as it grows, you can see that exact same distortion just becomes larger. And if it leaned 3 inches to the right, now it leans 10 feet to the right, and so on. And the lesson there is quite obvious, that in our education of our children, and not just the children, education of ourselves, that a very small deviation, it's like if you shoot off a spaceship, if you're sending it to Mars, if you're 1 inch off at Cape Canaveral, you're going to be a lot of miles off by the time you get to Mars. And the same thing, a little deviation, a little lean in the tree, or something that promotes the health of the tree, over time makes for a very healthy tree, or a very bent tree, or a very unhealthy tree, and so on and so forth. So the great lesson from trees are, because they exist in slow motion, they're slowed down, we can understand how profoundly a very small positive or negative thing that becomes part of our psyche, part of our way of dealing with the world, part of our way of looking at ourselves, can ultimately become very good or very bad. And that's one of the things you notice with a tree. The other thing is that many of the trees that Eretz Yisrael is praised with, in particular the olive tree, though grapevines live a long time too, but olive trees live a very, very long time. And there are trees that are 1,500 years old, we think, or end of evidence from taking a core out of them, that are still producing beautiful olives. And the concept is that the tree changes and ages and exists in different environments. But if what an olive tree is above else is a incredibly beautifully designed mechanism for producing olives. So since the olive tree, as if it were, knows it's an olive tree, it constantly produces olives in all environments, in all ages, in all shapes, and so on. And it's the same with us, that we go through life, we change, we grow, we age, we're in different environments, in different situations, different challenges. But the essence of a Jew is to do mitzvot, is to make God a dwelling place in this world through Torah, prayer, and above all the mitzvot. So if you know that you're a Jew tree, if you know that you're a mitzvah tree, that your purpose is to produce the mitzvot, so you know that no matter what the situation is, you're going to be able to do this. In the United States, they tend to mark the Holocaust, the day of the Warsaw Ghetto, the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But in all the rest of the world, Latin America, Europe, in Israel also, they mark but in particular outside the U.S. and Israel, they mark, they commemorate the Holocaust. My mother, who's a hidden child, just gave a talk for this. A bunch of teens from all over the world by Zoom. Is the 27th, is yesterday, because that's the secular date that when the Gregorian date when Auschwitz, which was the first major camp to be liberated, was liberated by the Soviet army. And the reason why I mention this is the reason why I mention this is that in the literature of the Holocaust we see in impossible times how Jews did amazing things to be able to do a mitzvah. And you think about it here, there's a sense that God is very distant from you and you've been abandoned to all kinds of horrific things. But nevertheless, a Jew is a tree of mitzvot. And no matter what, Jews found ways to do mitzvah. There's a book called by Yafa Eliach. She wrote a book called Hasidic Tales from the Holocaust, and there's another book by a fellow named Prager called Sparks of Glory, which is much earlier. And you both see this incredible commitment, no matter what. And the same thing with Jews in the Soviet Union, who during, when most mitzvot were forbidden during Stalin's times, and people could go to Siberia or be killed for it, they nevertheless found ways to perform the mitzvot under the most difficult of circumstances. And this is true throughout. Why? Because just as an olive tree in the good years and the bad years, it's always going to produce some olives, because that's what it is. So the lesson from Tu B'Shvat is that as a Jew, we're a mitzvah tree. And no matter what the situation, we have the ability to do some mitzvah, to do something. So that's the next theme that emerges from Tu B'Shvat. Another one, so another thing also is that because of that sometimes a person does a mitzvah and you don't realize what effect it has. Sometimes you, like the story I told the other day, someone once asked someone on the street to put on tefillin, and it only emerges years later. This person asks, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish?" And the person says, "No, I'm not." And it only emerged years later. I know this story firsthand, that the person was so upset upon reflection. Him and his wife reflected on the fact that he denied that he was Jewish, that they began a journey to educate their children and themselves, and became, from a completely disinvolved family, became deeply involved in Judaism. You don't know the effects that you have years and years later. I met, someone came to visit her mother in an old age home in Hartford, in West Hartford, where I used to live. And she stopped in, and and she's an observant lady, a mother, a grandmother. And she said she grew up in a very small town in Maine. It's not such a small town. It's a small Jewish community. It had about 10,000 people. In Maine, that's a big city. Where I grew up had 65,000 people, and that was like, 3 times the size of any other city there. So at any rate, but she said, so my father used to travel around Maine. He was the principal of the day school there and did other things. But every Sunday he would travel to different cities in Maine, so he would end up going every other Sunday to all these little towns, some hours and hours away, because there was one Jewish kid or 2 Jewish kids that he would study with. He didn't have Zoom or anything back then. And I remember him, I remember someone once discussing with him, saying, what's the purpose of this? You're going to see them a few times. You see them, 20 times a year. What influence are you going to have? He says, you never know. And it's up to us to do, right? So you're a mitzvah tree. You have to plant, and you see what grows, right? You plant a tree. It could be several, the people who planted those olive trees, it is by now 20 lifetimes, 25 lifetimes is still producing. You don't know. So anyway, so she says, yeah, so for a few years till my parents, they moved somewhere, or they, but for a few years, she told me, your father used to come. I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And, he taught me to read Hebrew, and he taught me to say the Shema by heart. So, for some reason, wherever I was, every day I said the Shema by heart before I went to bed. So she says that when she's in college, and like her roommate says, like, what do you say before you go to sleep? Says, I say the Shema. She says, what does it mean? Says, well, I don't quite know, but I know it's the most important Jewish prayer. So the question piqued her curiosity. And at this time, they had started to be Chabad houses on the campuses. So she found her local rabbi in Rebbitzin. And the rest of the story is that she has a wonderful Jewish family, from knowing nothing, very knowledgeable, has children and grandchildren all over the Jewish world. She lives in Australia, as it happens. But all because someone made her memorize, in this case, my father, the Shema, and taught her to memorize the Shema. So this tiny little bit of Judaism ultimately blossomed into an incredibly involved, huge Jewish family. So you never know. You plant the seed. It took 20 years for the seed to blossom. Sometimes it takes longer. And in that context, I'm going to share with you a little piece of Talmud that someone else put this together. It was a very good little piece for Tu B'Shvat. And I'm going to show you the particular piece that expresses this idea. Okay, Yom Echad. Let me make it side by side so you can all see. There we are. Yom Echad. This is Masechtas Tainus. One day, Choni the circle drawer was walking on the road, and he saw someone planting a carob tree. And he says, "Ad kama Sean, how long does it take for this tree to bear fruit?" He says, 70 years. And he said to him, "Are you certain you'll live another 70 years?" He says, "I found ready growing carob trees in this world. As my forefathers planted these for me, I plant these for my children." Chonik sat down to have a meal, and sleep overcame him. So this is where I think Washington Irving got Rip Van Winkle from. As he slept, the rocky formation enclosed upon him, which hid him from sight, and he continued to sleep for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a man gathering the fruit of the carob tree. And he asked him, "Are you the man who planted the tree?" The man says, "I'm his grandson." Therefore, he exclaimed, "It's clear that I slept for 70 years. Now, the point of the story is to make the point that Choni was shown at some way, whether this was in itself a dream that he slept for 70 years, but he was shown that it could be a son, it could be a grandson. You never know what the result of a person's effort to plant the seed, to plant the tree. And sometimes it can take several generations. Sometimes it can take many years. But again, trees live in slow motion. But with us, 20 years is a long time. And nevertheless, you never know what effect it has. And the same is to any mitzvah we do, not just education. Any mitzvah we do, you never know what effect it's going to have, what influence it's going to have in the long run. And there are many such stories. As a matter of fact, time doesn't allow, but I'll tell you a story. There's a very famous Hasidic story about a certain miser who wasn't a miser, and Rabbi Emanuel Shachar of blessed memory had a story where this story caused someone who didn't even know they were Jewish to embrace their Judaism. So at any rate, I'll find you the story. I'll share it another time, maybe tonight, in which case, even if you don't come to this class, you can always go on the Facebook or the YouTube page and watch the recording. But this idea of planting and growing over a long period of time and the value of even a very small mitzvah are things that are obvious with trees because they live so long, and we can derive a great lesson from. So before sunset, again, it is an important custom to eat from the fruits that Israel is praised with, which are grapes, olives, pomegranates, dates, and figs, and also to eat a new fruit, even if it's not one of those, a fruit you've not had in this season yet, fruit from a new that is new to you. And then you also say the blessing, Shehechiyanu, and it's all in my email, and it's all been posted also on my blog and the Schulz page and the Facebook page. And I wish everyone a truly wonderful Shana Tova, a good year, a happy Tree New Year, and may indeed our lives be filled with the sweetness of all the gifts that Hashem gives us. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You too. Thank
Shana
you.
Thank you,
Tova.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shana Tova indeed.